The dust cloud appeared on the horizon just after sunrise, moving fast across the desert like a brown storm. Rebecca pulled her bonnet tighter and squinted into the morning light. She had been riding with the wagon train for 3 weeks now, heading west to start her new job as a teacher in Santa Fe. The other travelers were good people, families hoping for better lives, traders carrying goods to sell. Indians, someone shouted from the front of the train. The peaceful morning exploded into chaos. Horses screamed. People yelled. Wagons turned in circles as drivers tried to find the best escape route. Rebecca's wagon driver, an old man named Pete, whipped the horses hard. The wagon bounced and shook so much that Rebecca had to hold tight to keep from falling out. "Stay down, miss," Pete yelled over the noise. "Keep your head low." But Rebecca could see the riders coming closer. They moved like part of their horses, flowing over the rocky ground like water. Their war cries echoed off the canyon walls. These were Apache warriors, and they were angry. The wagon hit a deep hole and tilted sideways. Rebecca heard the wooden wheel crack like a gunshot. The wagon rolled over, throwing her and Pete onto the hard ground. Pete didn't get up. Rebecca crawled to him, but she could see right away that his neck was broken. The old man was gone. All around her, the attack continued. But the main group of wagons was moving away from her now, leaving a trail of dust and dropped belongings. Some people made it. Others didn't. Rebecca found herself alone with the broken wagon and 2 frightened horses. One horse was hurt bad, bleeding from a cut on its leg. The other horse was okay but scared. Rebecca had grown up on a farm back east, so she knew about horses. She cut strips from her petticoat to bandage the wounded animal's leg. Her hands shook, but she worked carefully. "Easy, girl," she whispered to the hurt horse. "Easy now. Let me help you." The sun climbed higher. The desert got hot fast. Rebecca found a small bag of water and some dried meat in the wagon wreckage. Not much, but something. She led the good horse to a shady spot between some rocks and tied the hurt one nearby. The silence felt strange after all the noise and screaming. Rebecca could hear her own breathing, the horses snorting softly and the wind moving through the sagebrush. In the distance, she saw smoke rising from one of the wagons that didn't make it away. She tried not to think about the people who might be under that smoke. As the day went on, Rebecca made a plan. She couldn't stay here. The hurt horse couldn't travel far, but maybe the other one could carry her to safety. She had seen a town marked on Pete's map. Maybe 2 days' ride to the east. If she started early in the morning, she might make it. But first, she had to get through the night. Rebecca gathered wood for a fire as the sun started to set. The desert got cold after dark, and she needed light to keep the wild animals away. She had heard stories about mountain lions and wolves. The fire would help her feel safer. She found some beans in the wagon supplies and cooked them in a small pot. The food tasted good after the long, scary day. The horses ate some oats she found, and the hurt one seemed a little better. The stars came out bright and clear. Rebecca had never seen so many stars. Back home in Pennsylvania, the trees and buildings blocked most of the sky. Here, it felt like she could see forever. The moon was full and white, making the desert rocks look like silver. She fed more wood to the fire and wrapped Pete's old coat around her shoulders. Poor Pete. He had been kind to her, telling stories about his adventures while they traveled. He didn't deserve to die like that. Rebecca tried not to cry. Crying wouldn't help anything now. She needed to stay strong and think clearly. Tomorrow she would start riding east, back toward civilization. Maybe she would never make it to Santa Fe. Maybe her dream of teaching children in a frontier school was over before it started. The fire crackled and popped. One of the horses made a soft whinnying sound. Rebecca looked around at the rocks and shadows. Something felt different. The night seemed too quiet. She threw another piece of wood on the fire and the flames jumped higher. That's when she saw them. 2 eyes reflecting the firelight from behind a large boulder. Not animal eyes. Human eyes. Rebecca's heart started beating fast. She tried to act normal, like she hadn't seen anything. Maybe if she pretended not to notice, whoever it was would go away. She picked up the water bag and took a small sip, trying to keep her hands steady. The eyes disappeared. Rebecca waited, holding her breath. Minutes passed. Maybe it had been her imagination. Maybe the stress and fear were making her see things that weren't there. Then she heard a footstep on gravel behind her. Rebecca turned slowly and saw him standing at the edge of the firelight. An Apache warrior, Tall and lean with long black hair and dark skin painted with white and yellow stripes. He wore buckskin clothes and carried a rifle. His face showed no expression at all. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Rebecca had expected to feel terror, but instead she felt something strange. Curiosity. This man could have killed her already if that's what he wanted. Instead, he just stood there watching her. The warrior stepped closer to the fire. Rebecca could see his face better now. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe close to her own age. His eyes were intelligent and careful. He looked at the bandaged horse, then at the cooking pot, then at Rebecca. He said something in his own language. The words sounded musical, not harsh like she had expected. Rebecca shook her head to show she didn't understand. The warrior pointed to the fire, then made a sweeping motion with his hand toward the sky. Rebecca realized he was telling her that the smoke could be seen from far away. Other people might come looking for her. Bad people, maybe. Without saying anything else, the warrior kicked dirt over her fire. The flames died quickly, leaving them in moonlight. Then he pointed toward the hills and started walking. He looked back once and gestured for her to follow. Rebecca had a choice. She could refuse to go and hope he would leave her alone. Or she could trust this stranger who had just put out her fire, maybe to protect her. She looked at the hurt horse. The animal couldn't travel tonight, but the other horse could. Rebecca gathered the water bag and the little bit of food she had left. She untied the good horse and led it after the warrior. As they walked away from her camp, Rebecca looked back once at the hurt horse standing alone by the dead fire. She hoped the animal would be okay. She hoped she was making the right choice. The Apache warrior moved through the desert like he knew every rock and bush. Rebecca had to work hard to keep up, leading her horse carefully over the rough ground. The moon gave enough light to see, but the shadows played tricks on her eyes. They walked for hours without stopping. Rebecca's feet got sore in her city shoes. Her dress caught on thorns and rocks, but the warrior never slowed down, and she was determined not to ask him to wait for her. Finally, just before dawn, they reached a narrow canyon hidden between tall red cliffs. Rebecca could smell wood smoke and hear voices speaking softly in the Apache language. They had arrived somewhere important. The warrior stopped and looked at her one more time. In the gray morning light, Rebecca could see something in his eyes that might have been respect. She had followed him through the desert night without complaining. Maybe that meant something to him. He pointed toward the canyon opening and said one word in English. "Come." Rebecca took a deep breath and followed him into the hidden place that would change her life forever. The canyon opened up like a secret world. Rebecca had never seen anything like it. Red rock walls rose high on both sides, creating a hidden valley that felt safe and protected. Small cooking fires sent thin streams of smoke into the morning air. Apache families moved quietly around their camps, going about their daily work. Children played near a stream that ran down the middle of the canyon. Women ground corn on flat stones. Men worked on weapons and talked in low voices. Everyone stopped what they were doing when they saw Rebecca walking behind the warrior. The warrior's name was Nish, though Rebecca didn't know that yet. She watched how the others treated him with respect but not fear. This was a man who earned his position through wisdom and skill, not just strength. An old woman with silver hair and deep wrinkles came forward. She looked Rebecca up and down, taking in her torn dress and dusty face. The old woman said something sharp to Nish. Rebecca couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. "Why did you bring this white woman here?" Nish answered in a calm voice. He gestured toward Rebecca's hands, which were still stained with blood from bandaging her horse. He seemed to be explaining how she had cared for the injured animal instead of running away in panic. The old woman, whose name was Grandmother Ayana, studied Rebecca with eyes that had seen many winters. She had lived through the worst times, when soldiers burned villages and drove her people from their homes. She had every reason to hate all white people, but something in Rebecca's face made her pause. This young woman looked afraid but not hateful. She stood straight despite her fear, meeting Grandmother Ayana's gaze directly. That took courage. Grandmother Ayana pointed to a small shelter made of branches and animal skins. She said one word, "Stay." Rebecca understood. This would be her home now, at least for a while. She nodded and walked toward the shelter. Behind her, she could hear the Apache people talking quietly among themselves. Some voices sounded angry. Others seemed curious. Inside the shelter, Rebecca found a bed made of soft animal furs and a clay water jug. Simple things, but clean and well made. She sat down heavily, feeling tired for the first time since the attack. Her whole world had changed in less than 24 hours. Through the shelter opening, she could see Nalnish talking with other warriors. They kept looking in her direction. Rebecca wondered what they were planning. Were they deciding whether to keep her alive, whether to trade her back to white settlements, or something else entirely? A young girl brought her food, corn cakes and some kind of meat stew. The girl looked about 12 years old with sad eyes and careful movements. She set the food down without speaking and hurried away. Rebecca ate slowly, tasting flavors she had never experienced before. The corn cakes were sweet and filling. The stew had herbs that made her mouth tingle in a good way. Despite everything that had happened, she was hungry, and the food gave her strength. As the day went on, Rebecca watched the life of the camp. She learned by observing. The Apache people worked together like parts of a machine. Everyone had jobs to do. The men hunted and stood guard. The women cooked and made clothes. The children helped with small tasks and played games that taught them important skills. But this wasn't a happy, peaceful village. Rebecca could see the worry in people's faces. These families were hiding from something. They moved their camps often, staying ahead of soldiers who wanted to force them onto reservations far from their homeland. Nalnish came to check on her that evening. He brought fresh water and pointed to different things around the camp, saying their names in Apache. Water was Tu, fire was Ko, horse was Lin. Rebecca repeated the words, trying to get the sounds right. Nalnish nodded when she did well and corrected her gently when she made mistakes. His voice was patient like a teacher's. "Thank you," Rebecca said in English, then tried to think how to say it in Apache. Nalnish understood. He taught her. "Ahehi, ahehi," Rebecca repeated. For the first time since she had met him, Nalnish almost smiled. The days fell into a pattern. Rebecca learned more Apache words. She helped where she could, carrying water, gathering wood, watching children while their mothers worked. Nobody asked her to help. She just started doing what needed to be done. The sad-eyed girl who had brought her food that first day became her shadow. The child, whose name was Little Bird, had not spoken since soldiers killed her parents 6 months ago. She followed Rebecca around the camp, staying close but never talking. Rebecca tried to be gentle with Little Bird. She showed her how to braid hair in different patterns. She drew pictures in the dirt to tell stories. Slowly, Little Bird began to relax around her. One morning, Rebecca was helping to grind corn when she heard horses approaching the canyon. The whole camp tensed. Men grabbed their weapons. Women gathered their children close, but these were Apache horses, carrying Apache riders. Scouts returning from a dangerous mission. They brought bad news. Soldiers were moving through the area, searching for hidden camps. The families would have to move again soon. That night, the tribal council met around a large fire. Rebecca could see them talking seriously, making important decisions. Nalnish spoke for a long time, gesturing toward where she sat outside her shelter. Later, he came to see her. In his growing English mixed with Apache words, he tried to explain the situation. Soldiers were looking for them. The camp had to move to a more hidden place. Taking her with them would be dangerous for everyone. "You go back?" he asked in broken English. "To your people." Rebecca looked around the camp. In the past weeks, these people had become familiar to her. She knew which grandmother made the best bread, which children were the troublemakers, which men told the funniest stories around the evening fire. Little Bird was sleeping nearby, curled up like a small animal. The child had finally started to smile again, just a little. Rebecca couldn't imagine abandoning her now. "I stay," Rebecca said quietly. Nalnish stared at her for a long moment. "Dangerous," he said. "I know. Soldiers find you here, they think you Apache now. They shoot first, ask questions later." Rebecca had thought about this. If cavalry troops found her living with the Apache, they might assume she had gone native or been brainwashed. In their minds, she would no longer be a white woman worth saving. "I understand," she said. Nalnish sat down across from her. In the firelight, his face looked thoughtful and sad. "Why you stay? These not your people." Rebecca struggled to find the right words. How could she explain that she felt more useful here than she ever had in her old life? How could she describe the sense of purpose she felt when Little Bird smiled, or when she helped heal a sick child? "Maybe they are my people now," she said finally. Nalnish was quiet for a long time. Then he said something in Apache that she didn't understand, but his tone was gentle and surprised. The next morning, the camp began to move. Rebecca helped pack supplies and tear down shelters. She had become good at the work, moving efficiently alongside the Apache women. As they prepared to leave the canyon, Rebecca looked back once at the place where she had spent the last month. It had been her first real home among the Apache. She wondered if she would ever see it again. Little Bird took her hand as they started walking. The child's small fingers felt warm and trusting. For the first time since the wagon train attack, Rebecca felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Nalnish rode his horse alongside the walking families, keeping watch for danger. Sometimes he looked at Rebecca with an expression she couldn't read. Respect, maybe. Or puzzlement. He seemed to be trying to understand her choice to stay. Rebecca didn't fully understand it herself. All she knew was that these people needed her, and she needed them. The white world she had come from felt like a memory from someone else's life. As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, leaving no trail that soldiers could follow, Rebecca realized there was no going back now. She had chosen her side in a war she was only beginning to understand. The morning sun climbed higher as the small band of Apache families disappeared into the vast desert, carrying with them one white woman who had decided that freedom wasn't about having no bonds at all. It was about choosing which bonds mattered enough to accept. 3 weeks passed in the new camp, hidden deep in a maze of rock formations that only the Apache knew how to navigate. Rebecca's hands were getting tough from the daily work. Her pale skin was turning brown from the desert sun. Her fancy dress had been replaced with simpler Apache clothing that the women had made for her. But the biggest change was in how she saw the world around her. Every morning, Rebecca woke before dawn to help prepare the day's first meal. She had learned to make corn cakes that didn't fall apart, and to brew the bitter tea that gave everyone energy for the day's work. The Apache women had stopped watching her suspiciously and started including her in their conversations, even though she could only understand half of what they said. Little Bird had become her constant companion. The child still didn't speak, but she communicated with gestures and expressions that Rebecca had learned to read like a book. When Little Bird smiled, which happened more often now, her whole face lit up with joy. Rebecca was teaching Little Bird to write letters in the dirt with a stick. The child was quick to learn, copying the shapes carefully and remembering what each one meant. Rebecca had started with simple words like bird and water and friend. One afternoon while they practiced writing, Nalnish approached their spot by the stream. He had been watching Rebecca's teaching sessions with growing interest. "What is this?" he asked in his careful English, pointing to the marks in the dirt. "Letters," Rebecca explained. "They make words. Words make thoughts that you can see." Nalnish knelt down beside them. He was a quick learner, just like Little Bird. Rebecca showed him how to write his name using English letters, sounding out each part slowly. "Naalnish. In my language, this means he who learns," Nalnish said, tracing the letters with his finger. Rebecca smiled. That's a good name for someone who picks up new things so fast. As the days went on, their language lessons became a regular part of the evening routine. After the work was done and the fires were lit, Rebecca would teach English to whoever wanted to learn. In exchange, the Apache taught her their language, their customs, and their way of seeing the world. She learned that every plant in the desert had a purpose. Some could heal wounds, others could be eaten when food was scarce. A few could be made into tools or weapons. The Apache didn't see the desert as empty wasteland like most white people did. To them, it was a rich garden full of everything they needed to survive. Grandmother Ayana taught Rebecca how to weave baskets from desert grasses. The old woman's fingers moved like dancing spiders, creating beautiful patterns that told stories. Each basket was unique, carrying the maker's personal mark and family history. "Your hands are learning," Grandmother Ayana said one day, examining Rebecca's work. "But your heart must learn too. Weaving is meditation. It teaches patience and focus," Rebecca understood. The repetitive motion of weaving was calming. It gave her mind time to process everything that had happened to her, everything that was still happening. In the quiet concentration required for the work, She found a peace she had never known in her old life. But not everything in the camp was peaceful. Rebecca could see the stress that every adult carried. Food was sometimes scarce. Medicine was running low. The young men talked constantly about revenge against the soldiers who had driven them from their homes. One evening, a scout brought terrible news. Another Apache band had been captured and forced onto a reservation 300 miles away. Families had been separated. Children had been taken to boarding schools where they were forbidden to speak their own language or practice their customs. The camp fell into a deep sadness that night. Rebecca saw grown men crying openly. Women keened in low voices that seemed to carry all the pain in the world. Even the children were quiet, sensing the grief of their elders. Rebecca felt helpless. What could she do to ease this kind of suffering? Her teaching skills seemed so small against such enormous loss. But Little Bird came to sit beside her by the dying fire. The child leaned against Rebecca's shoulder, seeking comfort. And Rebecca realized that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be present when others are hurting. The next morning brought a new crisis. A young boy named Swift Runner had developed a fever during the night. His mother, Singing Woman, was frantic with worry. The camp's medicine man was away visiting another band and wouldn't return for several days. Rebecca had some basic knowledge of caring for sick people from her teacher training and from helping her mother nurse neighbors back home. She approached Singing Woman carefully, not wanting to overstep her bounds. "May I help?" she asked in Apache. Singing Woman looked desperate enough to try anything. She nodded. Rebecca felt the boy's forehead. He was burning up. She had Singing Woman gather all the clean cloth they could find while she prepared a cool bath in a large clay pot. Working together, they got the boy's fever down to a manageable level. Rebecca remembered her mother using willow bark tea for fevers. She described the tree to grandmother Ayana, who nodded knowingly and sent children to gather bark from willows growing near the stream. As they brewed the medicine together, Rebecca learned that the Apache had been using willow bark for generations, but they prepared it differently, combining it with other plants that made it work better. Rebecca's knowledge and the Apache wisdom worked together to create a stronger medicine than either could produce alone. Swift Runner's fever broke that night. When he woke up asking for food, his mother cried with relief. Word of Rebecca's healing help spread through the camp. From that day forward, people began bringing their sick children to her. Rebecca was careful to work alongside the traditional healers, not trying to replace them but adding her knowledge to theirs. She learned about desert plants that could stop bleeding, reduce pain, and calm upset stomachs. In return, she taught the healers about cleanliness and the importance of washing hands. She showed them how to make simple bandages that stayed clean longer. Knowledge flowed both ways, creating new understanding. Nalnish watched these developments with growing respect. One evening, as they sat by the fire practicing English letters, he said something that surprised her. "You are not captive anymore," he said quietly. Rebecca looked up from the stick she was using to write in the dirt. "What do you mean?" "First you were our prisoner. We took you because we needed to know if you would tell soldiers about our camp. But now," he struggled to find the right English words, "now you are here because you choose to be here." That is a different thing. Rebecca thought about this. When had the change happened? She couldn't point to a specific moment when she stopped being a prisoner and started being a member of the community. It had happened gradually, like the way the seasons changed. "Do you regret staying?" Nalnish asked. Rebecca looked around the camp. Little Bird was playing with other children, laughing at something one of them had done. Singing Woman was preparing food for her recovered son. Grandmother Ayana was teaching young girls how to weave, passing on knowledge that had been handed down for countless generations. "No," Rebecca said, "I don't regret it." But even as she said the words, she wondered what her choice really meant. Could she ever go back to white society? Would they accept her after living with the Apache? And what would happen if soldiers found the camp and discovered her there? Nalnish seemed to read her thoughts. "You are thinking about the future," he said. "Yes, aren't you? Apache people learn to live in the present moment. Future will come. We will meet it when it arrives." Rebecca tried to adopt this philosophy, but it was hard for someone raised in a culture that was always planning ahead, always worried about tomorrow. Still, she was learning to find peace in the daily rhythms of camp life. As the weeks passed, Rebecca found herself thinking less and less about her old life. The teacher she had been seemed like a different person entirely. That woman had lived by schedules and rules, always worried about doing the right thing according to other people's expectations. This new version of herself was more confident, more useful, more connected to the people around her. She had found a place where her skills mattered, where her presence made a real difference in people's lives. Late one night, as she listened to the sounds of the sleeping camp, Rebecca realized something that both thrilled and frightened her. She was happy, truly happy perhaps for the first time in her adult life. But she also knew that this happiness was fragile. The Apache were still refugees in their own land, still hunted by soldiers who saw them as obstacles to progress. The peaceful life they had built in this hidden canyon could be destroyed at any moment. Rebecca pulled her blanket closer and tried to follow Nalnish's advice about living in the present. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight she was safe, useful, and surrounded by people who had become her family. That was enough. The sickness came with the autumn rains. It started with just one person, a trader who had visited the camp to exchange goods. He seemed healthy when he arrived, but by the time he left, several children were coughing. Within 3 days, half the camp was sick. The coughing turned into fever. The fever brought weakness that left people unable to eat or drink. Rebecca recognized the signs from outbreaks she had seen back east. This was whooping cough, and it could kill children if not treated properly. Old Deer, the camp's medicine man, had returned just in time. He was a wise healer who knew every plant and remedy in the Apache tradition, but this white man's disease was different from anything his people had faced before. The traditional treatments weren't working well enough. Rebecca found Old Deer sitting outside his shelter, looking tired and worried. Children were crying in their families' homes and parents were beginning to panic. "May I help?" Rebecca asked in Apache. Old Deer looked at her with sharp eyes. He had heard about her success treating Swift Runner, but this was much more serious. Still, desperate times called for new approaches. "What do your people do for this sickness?" he asked. Rebecca explained what she knew about keeping airways clear, controlling fever, and making sure sick people got enough fluids. She described steam treatments that could help with the coughing and the importance of isolating the sickest patients to prevent spreading the disease. Old Deer listened carefully. Some of what Rebecca said matched his own knowledge. Other ideas were new to him. He made a decision that showed both wisdom and courage. He would work with her as a partner, combining their knowledge to fight this illness. They started by setting up a separate area for the sickest patients. Rebecca showed the helpers how to wash their hands with soap, made from yucca root, between caring for different patients. Old Deer prepared his strongest medicines for reducing fever and calming coughs. The work was exhausting. Day and night they moved between the shelters, checking on patients, adjusting treatments, trying to stay ahead of the disease. Rebecca learned to prepare Apache remedies while Old Deer experimented with her suggestions about steam inhalation and fluid replacement. Little Bird became sick on the 4th day. Rebecca's heart nearly broke when she saw the child's fevered face and heard her struggling to breathe. This was the first time since the trauma that had stolen her voice that Little Bird had seemed vulnerable again. Rebecca stayed by the child's side, using every technique she knew to keep her breathing clear. She held Little Bird upright during coughing fits, gave her small sips of healing tea, and told her stories in both English and Apache to keep her spirits up. On the worst night, when Little Bird's fever was so high that she seemed to be having visions, Rebecca held her hand and sang lullabies her own mother had sung to her long ago. The words were in English, but the love in them was universal. Nalnish found them there in the early morning. He had been helping with other patients, but hearing about Little Bird's condition, he came to see for himself. The sight of Rebecca caring so tenderly for the sick child seemed to move him deeply. "You could get sick too," he said quietly. "I know," Rebecca replied, not taking her eyes off Little Bird. "But I can't leave her." Nalnish knelt beside them. In Apache tradition, when someone cares for the sick, they share the risk. "This makes them family in the deepest way." Rebecca looked at him. "She's already family to me." By the end of the 2nd week, the crisis had passed. Most of the patients were recovering, though a few elderly people and one infant had died. The camp grieved for those they lost, but they also celebrated the many lives that had been saved. Old Deer announced to the entire camp that Rebecca had proven herself as a healer. He declared that she now had the right to prepare medicines and treat patients independently. This was an honor rarely given to outsiders, especially white people. But the recognition brought new responsibilities. People from neighboring bands began to seek Rebecca out when their own healers couldn't help with certain illnesses. Her reputation spread through the network of Apache families scattered across the territory. One afternoon, a desperate father arrived carrying his teenage son who had been bitten by a rattlesnake. The boy was unconscious and close to death. The local medicine man had done what he could, but the poison was winning. Rebecca had never treated a snakebite, but she had heard stories from frontier doctors about drawing out venom. Working with Old Deer, she tried everything she could think of, cutting and draining the wound, using suction to remove poison, applying poultices made from desert plants known to counteract toxins. For 3 days, they fought for the boy's life. Rebecca slept in brief naps beside his bed, monitoring his breathing and watching for signs of improvement. The whole camp prayed in their traditional way while Rebecca used every skill she had learned. On the 4th morning, the boy opened his eyes and asked for water. His father wept with joy and declared that Rebecca had worked a miracle. But Rebecca knew it had been teamwork, her medical knowledge combined with Old Deer's plant wisdom and the healing power of a community that refused to give up hope. During this time, Rebecca and Nalnish spent many hours working together. He helped her gather medicinal plants, translated for her when she needed to communicate with patients who spoke no English, and supported her during the most difficult cases. Their conversations during these long days revealed depths to both of them that neither had expected. Nalnish told her about his time at the mission school, where he had learned to read and write in English and Spanish. The experience had given him valuable skills, but had also shown him the contempt that many white people felt for Apache culture. "They wanted to kill the Indian in me," he said one evening as they prepared medicines by firelight. "Make me into a brown-skinned white man." But I knew that my people's ways had value too. Rebecca shared her own story of feeling trapped in the narrow role that society had planned for her. I was supposed to marry, have children, and keep house. Teaching was already considered too independent for a proper woman. Everything else I might have wanted to do was impossible. Here, what you do matters more than what you are supposed to do, Nalnish observed. Yes, that's exactly right. Their friendship deepened through these shared experiences. Rebecca began to see beyond Nalnish's role as a warrior to the thoughtful, educated man beneath. He saw past her white skin to the healer and teacher who had chosen to make his people's struggles her own. The first frost came early that year, signaling that winter was approaching. The camp would need to move again soon, to a more sheltered location where they could survive the cold months. But Rebecca no longer worried about these changes. She had learned to adapt, to find her place wherever the community needed her. Old Deer was getting older, and his joints hurt more each winter. He began teaching Rebecca some of his most closely guarded healing secrets, ceremonies, and plant combinations that had been passed down through generations of Apache medicine men. Knowledge must not die with the keeper, he told her. You have shown that healing wisdom can bridge different worlds. One evening, as Rebecca ground herbs in preparation for winter medicine, Grandmother Ayana came to sit beside her. You are not the same woman who came to us, the old woman said. No, Rebecca agreed. I'm not. Do you miss her? That other woman? Rebecca thought about this. Did she miss the school teacher who had been traveling to Santa Fe? That woman had been lonely, uncertain, always trying to meet other people's expectations. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of that life, Rebecca said finally. But I don't miss the emptiness. Grandmother Ayana nodded knowingly. Empty bowls make the most noise when the wind blows through them. Full bowls are quiet and useful. That night, Little Bird spoke her first words since the soldiers had traumatized her. She was helping Rebecca organize medical supplies when she quietly said, Thank you for taking care of me. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. The child's voice was soft and tentative, but it was real. All the risks Rebecca had taken, all the bridges she had burned, seemed worthwhile in that moment. Thank you for letting me, Rebecca whispered back. As winter approached, Rebecca realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not just a place to belong, but a purpose that used all of her skills and challenged her to grow beyond what she had thought possible. The Apache had given her a new name during the sickness. She Who Heals Across Worlds. It captured both her medical abilities and her role as a bridge between cultures. Rebecca wore the name with pride, knowing she had earned it through service and sacrifice, but she also knew that her real test was still coming. The peaceful autumn would give way to a harder winter, and beyond that lay unknown challenges that would test every lesson she had learned about courage, loyalty, and love. The full moon hung like a silver coin in the winter sky, casting blue shadows across the snow-covered desert. It had been exactly 1 year since Rebecca first saw Nalnish standing at the edge of her campfire. 1 year since her old life ended and this new one began. She sat outside her shelter, wrapped in a warm buffalo robe that grandmother Ayana had given her. The camp was quiet except for the occasional sound of someone moving around their fire or a horse shifting in the makeshift corral. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. Rebecca didn't need to look to know it was Nalnish. Over the months, she had learned to recognize his particular way of walking, confident but careful, making just enough noise to announce his presence without startling anyone. "You are thinking hard thoughts," he said, settling down beside her on a flat rock. "How can you tell?" "Your face. When you think hard, you get little lines here." He touched the space between his eyebrows, like you were trying to solve a difficult problem. Rebecca smiled. "I suppose I am." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moon track across the star-filled sky. The desert was beautiful in winter, stark and clean under its blanket of snow. But it was also dangerous. Food was scarce. The cold could kill. Every day of survival was an accomplishment. 1 year, Nalnish said finally. "Yes. Do you know why I brought you here that first night?" Rebecca had wondered about this many times. "You said once that you needed to know if I would tell soldiers about the camp. That was part of it, but not all." Nalnish was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not continue. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful, almost sad. "My sister was killed by soldiers 3 years ago. She was little bird's age, maybe younger. The soldiers said she was reaching for a weapon, but she was only picking flowers." Rebecca felt her heart tighten. She had heard pieces of this story from others, but never directly from Nalnish. "After that, I hated all white people. I wanted to kill everyone I met. But my grandmother told me that hatred is like a poison that hurts the person who carries it more than the person it's aimed at." He picked up a handful of snow and let it melt in his palm. "When I saw you that night, caring for your injured horse instead of running away, I thought maybe my grandmother was right. Maybe not all white people are the same. What did you plan to do with me? I didn't know. Keep you long enough to learn if you could be trusted. Then decide. And now?" Nalnish turned to look at her directly. In the moonlight, his face was serious but kind. "Now I want to give you something my people almost never give." "What's that?" "A real choice." He stood up and gestured for her to follow. They walked to the edge of the camp where the canyon opened onto the vast desert. Nalnish pointed to a trail that led away from their hidden valley. "Follow that path for 2 days, always toward the rising sun. You will come to a place where 3 roads meet. One leads to Santa Fe. One leads to the fort. One leads to the town called Silver Creek, where they need teachers." Rebecca stared at the trail. It looked like a thin line drawn in silver across the snow. "I could just leave? You have water, food, warm clothes, a good horse. Map drawn on leather that shows safe places to camp. Everything you need to reach white settlement safely. Why are you telling me this?" Nalnish was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because when someone stays only because they have no choice, they are still a prisoner. But when they stay because they choose to stay, even when they could leave, then they are truly free." Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening. All this time, she had thought she was trapped by circumstances, making the best of a situation she couldn't control. But Nalnish was offering her something different. Real freedom. The freedom to choose her own path, knowing all the alternatives. "What if I choose to stay?" "Then you stay as one of us. Full member of the band? Apache woman with Apache name and Apache rights. No more white woman living with Indians. Just family." The weight of this offer was enormous. Rebecca understood that accepting it would mean giving up any chance of returning to white society. Once she chose the Apache life completely, there would be no going back. "And what if I choose to leave?" "Then you go with honor. With gifts and good wishes, stories to tell your grandchildren about the winter you lived with the Apache." Rebecca looked out at the trail again. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the life she had been traveling toward when the wagon train was attacked. A teaching job in Santa Fe, a small house, respectability, safety. It would be a good life by most people's standards. Quiet and secure. But it would also be empty in ways that this Apache life was full. How long do I have to decide? Take the time you need. But winter is hard season for traveling. If you choose to leave, better to go soon. They walked back toward the camp. Rebecca felt like she was seeing everything with new eyes. The small shelters that had become home. The people who had become family. The work that had given her life meaning. Little Bird was sitting by her family's fire, weaving a small basket under her mother's guidance. The child looked up and waved when she saw Rebecca. Her smile was bright and trusting. Grandmother Ayana was telling stories to a group of younger women, teaching them the old ways through tales that carried wisdom from generation to generation. She nodded respectfully when Rebecca passed. Old Deer was preparing medicines for the morning's patients. He had been training Rebecca in the deeper mysteries of Apache healing, sharing knowledge that was usually kept within families. All of these people had invested in her. They had taken risks to include her, to trust her, to love her. Walking away would mean abandoning not just a place, but relationships that had changed her in fundamental ways. But staying would mean accepting a life of constant danger, uncertain food, and the knowledge that soldiers might find them at any time. Rebecca spent a sleepless night weighing her options. She made lists in her mind, trying to think logically about the choice. But every logical argument seemed small compared to the feeling in her heart when she imagined leaving Little Bird, or never seeing Nelnish again, or letting Old Deer's teachings die with him. The next morning brought a crisis that pushed all thoughts of leaving out of her mind. A messenger arrived with terrible news. Another Apache band had been attacked by soldiers. Survivors were heading toward their canyon, but some were badly wounded. Rebecca spent the day preparing for casualties. She organized supplies, set up treatment areas, and worked with Old Deer to prepare emergency medicines. When the survivors arrived that evening, she was ready. The wounded included 2 children and an elderly man who had been shot in the shoulder. Rebecca worked through the night, cleaning wounds, setting a broken arm, and fighting infection with every skill she had learned. As dawn broke over the canyon, the elderly man opened his eyes and smiled at her. "You are the healer they talk about," he said in Apache. "The one who bridges 2 worlds." "I'm just someone who knows a little about medicine," Rebecca replied. "No," the old man said. "You are much more than that. You are proof that different peoples can learn from each other instead of just fighting." His words stayed with Rebecca throughout the day. As she checked on her patients and helped with the regular work of the camp, she thought about what he had said. Was she really building a bridge between worlds? Could her choice to stay with the Apache make a difference beyond just her own life? That evening, Nelnish found her sitting by the stream where she often went to think. "The wounded ones will live," she told him, "because of your skills, because of all our skills working together." Nelnish sat down beside her. "Have you thought more about the choice?" Rebecca looked at her reflection in the dark water. The woman looking back at her had sun-weathered skin, work-roughened hands, and eyes that had seen both terrible losses and unexpected joys. "I've thought about it," she said. "And?" Rebecca took a deep breath. She had known what her answer would be from the moment Nelnish first offered her the choice. Everything since then had just been her mind catching up with her heart. "I choose to stay." Nelnish was quiet for a long moment. "You are certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Even knowing the dangers, the hardships, especially knowing them. This life is hard, but it's real. It matters. I matter here in a way I never did before." Nelnish smiled, and Rebecca realized it was the first time she had seen him look truly happy. "Then tomorrow night, we will have a ceremony. The elders will give you a new name and welcome you fully into the tribe. You will be Apache in all ways." Rebecca felt tears of joy and relief flowing down her cheeks. The choice was made. The bridge was burned. She was home. That night, as she prepared for sleep, Rebecca thought about the trail that Nelnish had shown her. It was still there, still offering escape if she ever changed her mind. But she knew she would never take it. Some choices, once made with a full heart, become part of who you are. They change you so completely that going back becomes impossible, not because you can't, but because you no longer want to. Rebecca had found her true self in this hidden canyon with these remarkable people. Tomorrow she would officially become one of them. But in her heart, she had been Apache from the moment she chose to stay and fight for Little Bird's life instead of running toward safety. The ceremony was scheduled for sunset, but it never happened. Rebecca woke that morning to the sound of urgent voices and running feet. Something was wrong. She stepped outside her shelter to find the camp in controlled chaos. Warriors were checking their weapons. Women were gathering children close. Scouts were pointing toward the canyon entrance and speaking in rapid, worried Apache. Nalnish appeared at her side, his face grim. "Soldiers," he said simply. Rebecca's blood turned cold. "How many?" "Full cavalry unit. Maybe 40 men. They are camped 3 miles from here but moving this way." The camp erupted into swift, practiced action. These people had fled from soldiers before. They knew exactly what to do. Essential supplies were packed quickly. The sick and elderly were prepared for travel. Escape routes were planned, but this time was different. The wounded from yesterday's attack couldn't travel far or fast. The winter weather made hiding tracks nearly impossible, and the canyon had only 2 exits, one blocked by rocks, the other leading directly toward where the soldiers were camped. "We're trapped," Rebecca realized. "Not trapped," Nalnish corrected. "But our choices are limited." The War Council met quickly. The elders, warriors, and camp leaders discussed their options in hushed, urgent voices. Rebecca couldn't follow all of the rapid Apache, but she understood enough to know they were in serious trouble. Deer approached her as the council argued strategy. "They are coming because of you," he said quietly. Rebecca felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean?" "Soldiers have been asking traders about a white woman living with Apache. Someone told them about the healer who bridges 2 worlds. The awful truth hit her. Her presence, which had brought so many good things to the camp, had also brought this danger. By staying, by becoming known throughout the network of Apache bands, she had painted a target on everyone she cared about. "I have to leave," she said immediately. "If I'm gone when they arrive, maybe they'll go away." "Too late for that. They are too close. You could not get away without being seen." Rebecca looked around the camp at the faces of people who had become her family. Children who trusted her, elders who had shared their wisdom with her, warriors who had accepted her as one of their own. All of them were in danger because of her choice to stay. The arguing voices from the council grew louder. Some wanted to fight. Others wanted to try to slip away under cover of darkness. A few suggested surrendering the white woman to buy safe passage for the rest. Rebecca made her decision. She walked to the center of the council circle and spoke clearly in Apache. "I will go to the soldiers. I will tell them I was held prisoner but escaped. I will lead them away from here." The circle fell silent. Every eye was on her. Nalnish stood up slowly. "That is a death sentence. They will know you have been living as Apache. Your skin, your clothes, your knowledge of our language. They will call you a traitor. Better me than all of you." "No." Grandmother Ayana's voice cut through the discussion like a blade. The old woman stood and fixed Rebecca with a fierce stare. "You think like white person still. Always individual solution to group problem. What do you mean?" "Apache way is different. We protect each other. We fight together. We survive together, or we die together." The other elders nodded agreement. Rebecca felt a mix of frustration and deep emotion. These people were willing to risk everything rather than sacrifice her to save themselves. "But I brought this danger to you," she protested. "Life brings danger," said Bearclaw, one of the senior warriors. "We choose how to face it." Young Wolf, a hot-headed fighter barely older than Rebecca, stood up angrily. "Easy words when our children are the ones who will pay the price. Give them the white woman and let them go." Several people started arguing at once. The council was splitting apart under pressure. Rebecca watched in growing horror as her presence divided the very people she loved most. "Enough." Nalnish's voice carried absolute authority. The arguing stopped. "Soldiers are coming whether we fight about this or not. We need a plan that saves as many as possible." Bearclaw outlined their options. They could try to hide in the deepest part of the canyon and hope the soldiers wouldn't find them. They could attempt to fight their way out, though they were badly outnumbered. Or they could scatter in different directions and hope some would escape. All of the options were terrible. All of them would likely result in deaths. As the council debated, Rebecca heard something that made her heart stop. Horses. The sound of many horses moving closer to the canyon entrance. "They're here," someone whispered. The sound of voices carried on the winter air. English voices giving orders and making plans. The soldiers had found them. Nalnish grabbed Rebecca's arm. "Come. There is something you must see." He led her to a rocky outcrop where they could look down at the canyon entrance without being seen. Below them, a line of blue-uniformed cavalry soldiers was setting up camp. Their rifles glinted in the afternoon sun. "Look at their leader," Nalnish said quietly. Rebecca focused on the officer directing the soldiers' movements. He was a tall man with graying hair and cold eyes. Something about him seemed familiar. "Colonel Morrison," she breathed. "You know him?" Rebecca nodded grimly. She had heard stories about Morrison from other frontier teachers. He was known for his hatred of Indians and his brutal methods of dealing with what he called the Apache problem. He had boasted in saloons that he would kill every Apache man, woman and child if given the chance. "He's not here to negotiate," Rebecca said. "He's here to kill everyone." They watched as Morrison sent scouts to explore the canyon. It was only a matter of time before the hidden camp was discovered. Rebecca felt a strange calm settle over her. The moment of choice had arrived, but it wasn't the choice she had been expecting. She could reveal herself to the soldiers and claim to be a rescued captive. She might survive, but everyone else would die, or she could stay hidden with the Apache and face whatever came together. When she really thought about it, there was no choice at all. "I'm staying," she told Nalnish. "You could live if you went to them. I could exist. That's not the same thing as living." They climbed back down to the camp where the final preparations were being made. The children and elderly were being moved to the most protected area. Warriors were taking positions behind rocks and trees. Everyone was trying to stay calm, but Rebecca could see the fear in their eyes. Little Bird found her as she was checking her medical supplies. The child took her hand and looked up at her with serious eyes. "Are you going to leave us?" Little Bird asked quietly. Rebecca knelt down and pulled the girl close. "Never, I will never leave you, promise?" "I promise." As the sun began to set, Morrison's voice echoed through the canyon. He was calling for the Apache to surrender, promising safe passage to a reservation if they came out peacefully. Everyone in the camp knew he was lying. The Apache had heard such promises before. Old Deer began singing a traditional song in a low voice. Others joined him. The melody was haunting and beautiful, filled with sadness but also with defiance. They were singing their death song, preparing to meet whatever came with courage and dignity. Rebecca found herself humming along, though she didn't know the words. In that moment, surrounded by people who had chosen to accept her as family, she felt more truly herself than she ever had in her life. The soldiers lit torches as darkness fell. Soon they would begin their search of the canyon. Nalnish appeared beside her one last time. "Are you ready?" Rebecca looked around at the faces of her chosen family. Grandmother Ayana, who had taught her wisdom, Old Deer, who had shared the secrets of healing, Little Bird, who had learned to trust again because of her care. All of them were prepared to die rather than abandon each other. "I'm ready," Rebecca said. And in saying those words, she realized something important. The ceremony that was supposed to make her officially Apache had been unnecessary. She had been Apache from the moment she chose to stay and fight for people she loved, instead of running toward safety. The real test had never been about learning their language or mastering their customs. It had been about choosing what mattered most when everything was at stake. As the soldiers' torches moved deeper into the canyon, Rebecca gripped her medicine bag and prepared to meet whatever came. She was no longer the frightened schoolteacher who had been captured a year ago. She was she who heals across worlds, and she was exactly where she belonged. The test of loyalty wasn't something that would happen in the future. It was happening right now, in this moment, as she chose to stand with her people against impossible odds. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The confrontation that everyone expected never came. Instead of attacking, Colonel Morrison made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the Apache knowledge of their own land. While his soldiers searched the main canyon, the entire band slipped away through a hidden passage that led deep into the rock formations. The escape route was treacherous, a narrow crack in the canyon wall that opened into a maze of underground caves. The Apache had used this emergency exit for generations, but it required leaving almost everything behind. Rebecca found herself crawling through passages so narrow that she had to remove her winter coat to fit through. Behind her, she could hear Little Bird breathing hard but staying quiet. Ahead of her, Nalnish led the way with the confidence of someone who had traveled this route before. They emerged hours later in a different canyon, miles from where Morrison's soldiers were still searching. Everyone was exhausted, cold, and frightened, but they were alive. The next months were the hardest Rebecca had ever experienced. Winter in the hidden caves was brutal. Food was scarce because they couldn't risk hunting in their usual areas. The children cried from hunger and cold. The elderly struggled with the harsh conditions. But something unexpected happened during those difficult times. The shared hardship brought Rebecca and Nalnish closer together in ways that the peaceful months never had. Working together to keep people alive, they developed a partnership that went beyond friendship. When Rebecca stayed up all night nursing a sick child, Nalnish brought her food and warm blankets. When he stood guard duty in the freezing cold, she made sure he had hot tea and dry clothes when he came back. Their conversations during those long winter nights revealed how much they had both changed. Nalnish told her about his dreams for his people's future, not the old life that was disappearing, but a new way that combined Apache wisdom with the skills needed to survive in a changing world. "We cannot go back to the way things were," he said one night as they sat by a small fire deep in the caves. "The buffalo are gone. The old hunting grounds are occupied by settlers. We must find a new path." "What kind of path?" Rebecca asked. "One that keeps our spirit but adapts to new realities." "Like you did." Rebecca had never thought of herself as an example of adaptation, but she was beginning to understand what he meant. She had kept the best parts of her original identity, her intelligence, her compassion, her desire to help others, while learning to live in a completely different world. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked. "For whole communities to change that much? I think it's the only way to survive." As winter slowly gave way to spring, the band began to emerge from hiding. Morrison's soldiers had given up their search and moved on to terrorize other Apache groups. But the reprieve was temporary. Everyone knew that more soldiers would come. The tribal council met to discuss their options. Some wanted to surrender and accept life on a reservation. Others talked about joining Geronimo's resistance fighters in Mexico. A few suggested trying to disappear entirely, living in small groups that could move quickly and avoid detection. Rebecca listened to these discussions with growing understanding of how impossible the situation had become. Every choice led to loss. Every path forward required giving up something essential. It was during one of these council meetings that Nalnish made a suggestion that surprised everyone. "What if we tried something different?" he said. "What if we worked with the few white people who might help us?" The suggestion was met with angry opposition. Too many Apache had been betrayed by white promises. The general feeling was that no white person could be trusted, but Nalnish pressed on. "There are traitors who deal honestly with us, missionaries who oppose the Army's methods, even some government officials who think the current policies are wrong." "And how would we contact these people?" asked Bear Claw skeptically. Nalnish looked at Rebecca. "We have someone who can speak both languages, someone who understands both worlds." All eyes turned to Rebecca. The idea of her serving as a diplomat between the Apache and white authorities was both logical and terrifying. "I don't know if anyone would listen to me," she said. "Honestly, they would listen," said Old Deer unexpectedly. "You are famous now. The school teacher who chose to live with Apache. People are curious about your story." Over the following weeks, a plan took shape. Rebecca would make contact with sympathetic whites who might help the band find a legal way to remain on a small portion of their traditional lands. It was a desperate gamble, but all their options were desperate now. The first step was reaching Reverend Hamilton, a missionary in Santa Fe who was known for his criticism of military tactics against Indians. Rebecca would travel to the mission, tell her story, and ask for his help in contacting federal officials who might negotiate in good faith. The journey to Santa Fe would be dangerous. Rebecca would have to travel alone through territory patrolled by soldiers who were looking for Apache. If she was caught, she could be arrested as a deserter from white civilization. As the departure date approached, Rebecca felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. She would be returning to the white world for the first time in over a year. Would she remember how to act like the person she used to be? The night before she left, Nalnish found her sitting by the stream where they had shared so many conversations. "Are you afraid?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. Fear will keep you careful." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water flowing over the rocks. Finally, Nalnish spoke again. "There is something I want to tell you before you go." Rebecca looked at him expectantly. "I love you," he said simply. The words hung in, the air between them like something precious and fragile. Rebecca felt her heart racing. "I love you too," she said. They had both known it for months, but saying it out loud made it real in a way that changed everything. "When you come back," Nalnish said, "if you come back, I want to ask the elders for permission to marry you." "What if they say no?" "They won't. You are Apache now. You have proven your loyalty beyond any doubt." Rebecca felt tears of joy and fear flowing down her cheeks. She was about to risk everything they had built together on a dangerous mission that might fail completely. "What if I don't come back?" Nalnish took her hands in his. "Then I will come looking for you, no matter how long it takes or how far I have to travel." They held each other as the moon rose over the canyon. Tomorrow, Rebecca would return to a world she had left behind. But now she had something to come back to that was worth any risk. The journey to Santa Fe took 3 days. Rebecca dressed in Apache clothing for most of the trip, but changed into a dress she had saved from her old life before entering the town. The transformation felt strange, like putting on a costume. The white world seemed alien to her now. The buildings felt too closed in. The people moved too fast and talked too loud. Everyone seemed stressed and unhappy in ways that the Apache, despite all their hardships, never did. Reverend Hamilton was a kind man in his 50s who listened to Rebecca's story with growing amazement. He had heard rumors about a white woman living with the Apache, but meeting her in person was something else entirely. "You've changed," he said after she finished speaking. "Not just your appearance, but something deeper." "I've learned what's important," Rebecca replied. Hamilton agreed to help. He had contacts in Washington who might be willing to negotiate if the Apache could offer something in return. Rebecca suggested that Nalnish's education and language skills could be valuable to the government. Many Apaches spoke no English, making communication difficult during negotiations. Over the next month, letters flew back and forth between Santa Fe and Washington. Rebecca stayed at the mission, helping to teach children and slowly readjusting to white society. But every day she thought about the hidden canyon and the people waiting for her return. Finally, the reply came. A federal negotiator was willing to meet with Apache representatives to discuss the possibility of setting aside a small reservation on their traditional lands. It wasn't everything they wanted, but it was hope. Rebecca felt her heart soaring as she read the letter. The plan was working. There might be a future for her people after all, but as she prepared to return to the canyon with the good news, Rebecca realized something important had happened during her month in Santa Fe. The white world no longer felt like home to her. She was counting the days until she could get back to the desert, back to the people who had become her real family. The love she felt for Nalnish had grown stronger during their separation. But it wasn't just romantic love anymore. It was the deep connection that comes from sharing the same dreams and fighting for the same future. As she rode back toward the hidden canyon, Rebecca thought about the ceremony that had been interrupted by Morrison's soldiers. Soon, if everything went well, she and Nalnish would have their chance to declare their commitment to each other and to the life they were building together. But first, she had to help save his people, their people, the people who had given her a home when she most needed one, and who were now depending on her to help them find a path to survival. The full moon was rising as Rebecca reached the familiar rocks that marked the entrance to the secret canyon. She was home. And tomorrow the real work of building a bridge between two worlds would begin. 5 years had passed since that first moonlit night when Nalnish offered Rebecca her freedom. Now, as she stood at the edge of their permanent settlement, watching their children play in the evening light, she marveled at how much had changed. The negotiations had been long and difficult. There had been setbacks, betrayals, and moments when it seemed like all hope was lost. But Rebecca's unique position as someone who truly understood both worlds had made the difference. She had traveled back and forth between the Apache camps and government offices in Santa Fe dozens of times. Each trip had been dangerous, but each had also built trust on both sides. The federal officials learned that the Apache were not the savage warriors of popular imagination, but intelligent people trying to survive in an impossible situation. The Apache learned that not all white people were their enemies. Some, like Reverend Hamilton and the federal negotiator Judge Morrison, genuinely wanted to find peaceful solutions. The final agreement had given the band rights to a section of their traditional canyon lands. It wasn't huge, only about 50 square miles, but it included the sacred sites that mattered most to them and enough resources to support their community. In exchange, Naelnish had agreed to serve as an official liaison between the Apache and the territorial government. His education and language skills made him invaluable for preventing the kind of misunderstandings that had led to violence in the past. Rebecca had become the settlement's official teacher and medical officer. She taught Apache children to read and write in both English and their native language, preparing them for a world where they would need both sets of skills. More importantly, she had established a small hospital that served not just the Apache community, but also nearby white settlers. The bridge she had built between healing traditions had saved countless lives and created bonds of mutual respect that went far beyond politics. The wedding ceremony had taken place 3 years ago, under the same full moon where Naelnish had first offered her the choice to stay or go. The celebration had lasted for 3 days and included both Apache traditions and elements from Rebecca's childhood faith. Judge Morrison, who had become an unlikely friend and ally, had traveled from Santa Fe to witness the ceremony. Reverend Hamilton had performed a Christian blessing alongside the Apache rituals. It was a perfect symbol of the new world they were all trying to build together. Now Rebecca was pregnant with their third child. Their oldest, a boy named Thomas after her father but called Little Teacher by the Apache, was 4 years old and completely bilingual. Their daughter Maria, named for Rebecca's mother but known as Laughing Water, was 2 and already showing signs of inheriting her mother's healing gifts. The children played easily with both Apache and white children. To them, the idea that people from different backgrounds couldn't get along seemed completely foreign. They were growing up as living proof that understanding and cooperation were possible. Little Bird, now a young woman of 17, had become Rebecca's assistant in both teaching and healing. The child who had been traumatized into silence was now one of the most articulate people in the settlement, equally comfortable speaking Apache English or Spanish. She had just announced her engagement to a young Apache man from another band, and Rebecca was helping her plan a wedding that would bring together families from across the territory. Old Deer had lived to see the peaceful settlement established, but had died the previous winter at the age of 83. Before his death, he had formally passed on his knowledge to Rebecca, making her the community's recognized medicine woman. "You have learned the deepest truth," he had told her in his final days. "Healing is not about choosing between different kinds of medicine. It is about using whatever works to help people live better lives." Grandmother Ayana was still alive and sharp-witted at 91. She spent her days teaching the traditional crafts to young people and telling stories that preserved Apache history and culture. She had become Rebecca's closest advisor and friend. The old woman often reminded Rebecca of their first meeting, when she had been suspicious of the frightened white woman who had been brought to their camp. "I thought you would be trouble," Grandmother Ayana liked to say. I was right, but it was good trouble, the kind that makes things better. The settlement had grown beyond the original band. Other Apache families had come to join them when they heard about the legal protection and the successful cooperation with white authorities. The population had tripled, and they were planning to establish a second village to accommodate all the newcomers. But growth brought new challenges. Some of the newer arrivals had trouble accepting Rebecca's position in the community. A few questioned whether a white woman could truly understand Apache ways, no matter how long she had lived among them. These tensions came to a head during a council meeting where the community was deciding whether to allow a mining company to extract copper from a small section of their lands. The company was offering good money that could fund schools and medical facilities. Some families supported the plan, seeing it as a way to secure their children's future. Others opposed it, arguing that mining would damage sacred sites and pollute the water that sustained their community. The debate grew heated. During one particularly intense exchange, a newcomer named Red Wolf stood up and pointed directly at Rebecca. Why should we listen to the white woman? He demanded. She may wear our clothes and speak our language, but her blood will always be the blood of our enemies. The council fell silent. Rebecca felt every eye in the room on her. This was the challenge she had always known might come. The moment when her place in the community would be openly questioned. Nalnish started to stand, ready to defend his wife, but Rebecca gently touched his arm. She needed to speak for herself. Red Wolf asks a fair question, she said calmly in Apache. Let me answer it. She stood and looked around the circle at faces she had known for years. Some showed support, others showed uncertainty. A few showed the kind of suspicion that Red Wolf had voiced. I was not born Apache, Rebecca said. That is true, but neither were some of you who married into this band from other tribes. Neither were the Mexican children we adopted after their parents died. Neither were the white captives who chose to stay and become family. She paused, choosing her words carefully. What makes someone Apache is not the color of their skin or the place of their birth. It is their commitment to Apache values, their willingness to sacrifice for the good of the community, their respect for Apache wisdom, and their desire to preserve it for future generations. Red Wolf remained standing, his face skeptical. Easy words. But when the soldiers come again, which side will you choose? I have already chosen, Rebecca replied. 5 years ago, when Colonel Morrison's soldiers surrounded our canyon, I chose to hide with you instead of revealing myself to them. I chose to risk death rather than abandon my family. Grandmother Ayana spoke up from her place in the circle. This woman has bled for us, worked for us, and brought life into our community. Her children are Apache children. Her husband is Apache. Her heart belongs to us. And her skills have saved us, added Bearclaw, now one of the senior warriors. Without her work as a bridge between worlds, we would all be dead or imprisoned on distant reservations. The debate continued for hours, but gradually the mood shifted. One by one, community members stood to share stories of how Rebecca had helped them. A woman talked about the difficult birth where Rebecca's medical knowledge had saved both mother and child. A man described how Rebecca's negotiations had prevented a misunderstanding that could have led to war. Even some of Red Wolf's supporters began to look uncomfortable. The evidence of Rebecca's loyalty and contribution was overwhelming. Finally, Old Bear, the eldest member of the council, raised his hand for silence. I have listened to all these words, he said slowly. Good words and angry words, true words and foolish words, but I remember something that might end this argument. He looked directly at Rebecca. Do you remember what name the elders gave you during the Great Sickness? Rebecca nodded. She who heals across worlds. Yes, and do you remember why? Because I helped bridge the gap between Apache medicine and white medicine. Old Bear smiled. Partly, but the deeper meaning was this. You heal the wounds between different peoples. You make it possible for enemies to become friends. He gestured toward the mixed group in the council circle. Apache from different bands, adopted Mexican children, even a few white traders who had been accepted into the community. Look around this room. Apache, Mexican, white, mixed blood, all living together as one people. This did not happen by accident. It happened because someone showed us it was possible. Red Wolf sat down slowly, his opposition deflated by the elder's words. The mining question was eventually decided by compromise. The company would be allowed to extract copper from a small area, but only under strict environmental conditions and with profits shared equally among all families. More importantly, the challenge to Rebecca's position had been met and answered. Her place in the community was now secure beyond any doubt. That night, as Rebecca and Nalnish walked home under the familiar full moon, he squeezed her hand. I was proud of how you handled that, he said.